Dr. Avery Caldwell had always imagined first contact with an intelligent alien species to be a moment of awe, diplomacy, and scientific breakthrough. Instead, it was shaping up to be the most awkward moment of his life. It had all started with an innocent mistake. Avery was one of the top exobiologists aboard the deep space research vessel Vanguard, currently orbiting Xiphora 7, home to an elusive and newly discovered alien species, the Miru. For years, the Miru had been nothing more than a distant enigma, a rumor among deep space explorers. Then one fateful month ago, they had made themselves known, initiating diplomatic contact and agreeing to share limited cultural and scientific exchanges. As one of the few human scientists selected for this interspecies research program, Avery had been assigned to work alongside a Miru scholar named Ejari. They had spent the last week engaged in deep discussion, comparing notes on biology, environmental studies, and technology. Ejari was unlike any being Avery had ever encountered, tall and graceful, with elongated limbs and luminous lavender skin that shimmered in bioluminescent waves. Their voice carried a musical quality, and their large violet eyes were expressive despite the Miru's otherwise serene demeanor. Avery had just begun to understand the complexity of their culture when the incident happened. It had been a long day of research, and his mind was preoccupied with data analysis as he walked through the research station. The Miru, being meticulous about their traditions, had given the human researchers strict guidelines on where they could and couldn't go. But in his exhaustion, Avery hadn't paid attention to the signs. He had simply pushed open a door, expecting to find the common laboratory where they usually worked. Instead, he found Ejari, completely unclothed. For a moment, his brain failed to process what he was seeing. Miru clothing was typically elaborate, layers of flowing silk-like fabric draped over their bodies, with intricate golden accents that symbolized their status and expertise. But right now, Ejari wasn't wearing any of it. Their smooth, violet skin was entirely exposed, covered only by the shifting luminescent patterns unique to their species. The glow pulsated rapidly, changing from soft blues to an alarming deep crimson. It was, Avery realized, the color of pure horror. Then Ejari shrieked. Not a simple gasp, not a startled yelp, an actual full-volume, ear-splitting shriek. The sound reverberated through the metallic walls of the research station, followed by a series of high-pitched whistles that Avery could only assume were Miru expletives. Panic surged through him. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't know this was... Ejari scrambled backward, their three-fingered hands clutching at their own face as if trying to disappear. "You have seen me!" they wailed, their bioluminescence flickering in chaotic patterns. Avery instinctively turned away, squeezing his eyes shut. "I swear it was an accident. I thought this was the lab." There was a long pause, followed by an almost trembling breath. "You do not understand what you have done." Something about their tone sent a cold chill down Avery's spine. He cautiously turned back, just enough to see Ejari wrapping themselves in a long piece of shimmering fabric. Their movements were stiff, their posture rigid. Avery forced a nervous chuckle, trying to diffuse the tension. "Look, I get that this was bad, really bad, but surely it's not the end of the world, right?" Ejari's eyes bore into him with an intensity he had never seen before. "For my species, being seen in our natural state by an outsider is the most intimate of acts." Avery blinked. "Oh." Their glow dimmed. "It signifies trust beyond all else. It is a sacred bond. A connection so deep that it cannot be undone." "Oh." Ejari inhaled deeply, as if bracing themselves. When they spoke again, their voice was calm but resolute. "Our species must bond forever." Avery's brain stalled. "I'm sorry." "What?" Ejari's expression was unreadable. "It is law, a custom that predates recorded history. The moment you saw me like this, our destinies became entwined." Avery felt his stomach drop. "You're not saying what I think you're saying." Ejari simply nodded. "I am." Avery took a slow step backward, rubbing his temples as if that would somehow undo what had just happened. "Hold on. Let's Let's clarify here. You're telling me that because I saw you naked by accident, your culture dictates that we're now bonded, like permanently? Ezri hesitated, then gave a solemn nod. Yes. Avery let out a noise somewhere between a groan and a laugh. Okay, well that's absurd. No offense. Ezri narrowed their eyes. To you, perhaps, but in Weru culture, this is binding. Avery raised his hands. All right, there's got to be a loophole here, right? Some kind of ritual unbinding ceremony? Ezri's glow flickered uncertainly. There are historical accounts of such cases. However, they are rare and viewed as dishonorable. Avery groaned. Of course they are. His comlink suddenly buzzed. He tapped it with a sigh, only to hear the stern voice of Captain Morales, his commanding officer aboard Vanguard. Caldwell, meet me in the command center. Now. Avery's heart sank. That did not sound like the tone of someone delivering good news. Ejari gave him a knowing look. Your people have been informed. Avery exhaled slowly. Yeah, and I have a feeling this is about to get worse. Ejari's bioluminescence dimmed to a soft, regretful blue. Yes, it is. Avery marched toward the command center with Ejari trailing silently behind him. The research station's corridors, usually a place of quiet focus, now felt suffocating. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind scrambling for a way out of this surreal disaster. This isn't happening, he muttered to himself. This is a stress dream. Any second now I'll wake up. You are not dreaming, Ejari said calmly. Avery shot them a look. That doesn't help. They stepped into the command center where Captain Morales stood with her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of exasperation and barely concealed amusement. On the large holoscreen behind her was Saravan, a high-ranking Mihiru diplomat whose flowing robes shimmered with the soft gold of authority. The moment Avery and Ejari entered, the room fell into silence. Morales exhaled sharply. Let me get this straight, Caldwell. You walked into the wrong room, saw something you weren't supposed to see, and now you're, what? Married? Ejari bristled. Bonded. Avery winced. That makes it sound worse. Saravan observed the interaction with serene patience before speaking. Dr. Caldwell, I understand this is unexpected. However, you must know that in Miru culture, such an event is sacred. The bond cannot be dismissed. Avery pinched the bridge of his nose. Look, I respect your traditions, but there has to be some way to undo this. Can't we just pretend it didn't happen? Saravan's bioluminescence pulsed in a slow, disapproving wave. That would be highly disrespectful, Ejari crossed their arms. And dishonorable. Captain Morales leaned against the console, giving Avery a look that clearly said, fix this, or I'll throw you out an airlock myself. So what does this bonding actually entail? And how does it affect my crew member? Saravan's voice remained steady, almost ceremonial. It is a lifelong connection, intellectual, emotional, and sometimes physical, depending on the pair. Avery choked. Sometimes. Ejari's glow flickered in what might have been embarrassment. Not all bonds are the same. Some are strictly intellectual partnerships. Others are closer. It depends on compatibility. Morales smirked. So what you're saying is it's up to you two whether this is a marriage or just an eternal lab partnership? Avery groaned. I feel like both are bad options, Saravan interjected, her expression serious. Regardless of what form your bond takes, there is a necessary ritual to solidify it. Avery felt an impending sense of doom. Of course there is, Saravan continued. Traditionally, the bonded must undergo the ceremony of unison. It is a formal acknowledgement of the connection between two beings, ensuring their bond is recognized by both Miru and outsiders. Avery let out a sharp laugh. Great! A whole ceremony to make this even more official, exactly what I wanted. Ejari regarded him coolly. Your sarcasm is unnecessary. Saravan ignored him, her voice unwavering. The ceremony must take place under the twin moons of Zyphora 7 before the next lunar cycle. You will exchange oaths of understanding and undergo the traditional sharing of knowledge. Morales arched a brow. And what happens if he doesn't participate? A tense silence followed. Ijari's glow shifted to a muted violet. It would be deeply shameful. Not just for me, but for the entire Miru delegation. It could strain relations between our species. Saravan nodded. Such an insult would be grave. Avery groaned, dragging a hand down his face. So if I refuse, I'm not just an inconsiderate idiot. I'm an intergalactic criminal. Morales gave him a tight smile. Glad you're catching on. Avery exhaled in defeat. Fine. What do I have to do? Ijari's expression softened slightly, their glow returning to a neutral blue. It will not be painful. The ritual consists of 3 parts: the exchange of knowledge, the spoken vow of unity, and the symbolic offering of sustenance. Avery frowned. Wait, that last part, are we talking food? Ijari nodded. Yes, we each must share something meaningful from our cultures. Morales snorted. So you're telling me that after all this, Caldwell just has to give you a cheeseburger and we're good? Ijari tilted their head. What is a cheeseburger? Avery waved a hand. Long story. I'll find something. He sighed, rubbing his temples. All right, let's get this over with. The ceremony of unison. 2 days later, under the light of Xiphora 7's twin moons, Avery stood beside Ijari in the ceremonial gardens of the Miru Enclave. He had seen many alien landscapes, but this was unlike anything he had ever witnessed. The entire area was bathed in an ethereal glow from bioluminescent plants, their colors shifting in rhythmic patterns. Hiru elders stood in a semicircle, their robes shimmering under the moonlight. Saravan presided over the ceremony, her voice carrying through the air like a gentle hum. The first step, she said, is the exchange of knowledge. Ijari turned to Avery, presenting a small crystalline tablet. This contains a fragment of my personal research and in-depth study of Xiphora 7's microbial ecosystems, a topic close to my heart. Avery accepted it with reverence, then pulled a small datapad from his pocket. And this is my favorite book, Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot. It's about humanity's place in the cosmos. Ijari took the datapad, studying it carefully. Their bioluminescence pulsed in a soft, contented pattern. The second step, Saravan continued, is the spoken vow of unity. Ijari turned to face Avery. I vow to respect the bond that fate has placed upon us, to share knowledge, to act with honor, and to uphold the traditions of my people. Avery hesitated, then sighed. And I vow to, not embarrass you. And to, respect your traditions. Even if they're complicated. Saravan's lips twitched in amusement, but she nodded approvingly. The final step, the symbolic offering of sustenance. Ijari presented a delicately wrapped package revealing a translucent fruit with a soft glow. This is Vera. It is sacred among my people, a fruit that only grows under our twin moons. Avery took a cautious bite. It was sweet and floral, with an aftertaste that tingled against his tongue. Then, with a deep breath, he held up his own offering. And this is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Ijari studied the strange, compact food before taking a small, cautious bite. Their eyes widened slightly. It is unexpected. Avery grinned. Yeah, that's what everyone says at first. Saravan smiled. The bond is complete. As the ceremony concluded, Avery looked at Ijari, realizing that despite the absurdity of it all, something had changed between them. Maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be so bad after all. The moment the bonding ceremony ended, Avery had foolishly thought that life would return to something resembling normalcy. He was wrong. Very, very wrong. If anything, his life had become even more complicated. For one, the Miru delegation now treated him like he was an honored spouse, or, at the very least, a deeply respected lifelong companion to Ijari. He could no longer simply walk around the research station without being greeted with formal bows or hushed whispers. Miru scientists who had previously been distant and professional now regarded him with intrigue, deference, and in some cases pity. But worst of all, he and Ajari were never alone. Wherever he went, there was a Miru attendant, a dignitary, or a curious scholar observing their every move as if waiting to see what kind of bonded pair they would be. "I feel like an animal in a zoo," Avery grumbled as he sat across from Ajari in the research lab, trying to focus on a stack of environmental data. Ajari didn't even look up from their own console. "They are merely ensuring you adapt to your new role." Avery sighed. "And what exactly is my new role?" Ajari finally met his gaze, their bioluminescence flickering in shades of contemplation. "That depends." "On what?" Ajari set down their datapad, tilting their head. "You and I must decide the nature of our bond. The ritual solidified our connection, but its form is still undefined." Avery groaned. "Oh, great. So on top of being accidentally bonded to an alien, I now have to figure out the rules of our relationship?" Ajari gave a slow nod. "Precisely." Avery slumped forward, rubbing his temples. "Just tell me what you want. Do you want us to be like cosmic lab partners, close friends, co-workers who tolerate each other?" He hesitated. "Or, something else?" Ezri's glow shifted to a thoughtful teal. "Friendship would be acceptable. I believe we share mutual respect and intellectual compatibility." Avery exhaled in relief. "Great. Friendship. That I can handle." Ajari arched a brow. "However, friendship among the Miru is different from what you may be accustomed to." Avery frowned. "Define different." Ajari folded their hands neatly in front of them. "Miru bonded pairs who choose friendship engage in ritual proximity." Avery stared. "What?" Ajari's glow didn't waver. "We must maintain a certain level of physical closeness. It symbolizes trust." Avery blinked. "How close?" Ajari's expression remained perfectly composed. "Typically no more than 5 paces apart at all times." Avery's mouth fell open. "You're kidding." Ajari shook their head. "I do not kid." Avery's brain short-circuited. "So, you're saying that for the rest of my life I have to be within 5 paces of you?" Ajari's glow pulsed with mild amusement. "Not always. Exceptions are made for personal necessities." Avery threw his hands in the air. "Oh, great. So I get bathroom breaks. How generous." Ajari tilted their head. "You are distressed." Avery laughed, borderline hysterically. "Of course I'm distressed. My life just turned into an intergalactic buddy system." Ajari sighed. "If you find it so unbearable, we may request an adjustment to the tradition." Avery groaned, rubbing his face. No. If we start breaking rules now, the Miru Council is probably going to exile me or something." He shook his head. "Fine, whatever. Ritual proximity it is." Ajari inclined their head. "I appreciate your cooperation." Avery pointed at them. "But if I wake up in the middle of the night and you're standing outside my door, I swear—" Ajari's glow flickered in amusement. "I will not intrude upon your sleep cycle." Avery sighed. "Well, that's something at least." Adjustment. Over the next few weeks, Avery learned the true challenge of ritual proximity. Everywhere he went, Ajari went too. Boarding the research shuttle. Ajari was in the seat next to him, heading to the cafeteria. Ajari trailed behind, scrutinizing his food choices. Taking a walk outside the station. Ajari glided alongside him, their long limbs making his own pace seem sluggish. It wasn't that. Ajari was bad company, quite the opposite. They were intelligent, curious, and surprisingly funny in their own dry, logical way. But Avery was used to his independence. Having someone constantly within arm's reach was maddening. There was their part. He was starting to get used to it. The first time he absent-mindedly set aside a second cup of coffee for Ajari without thinking, he nearly had a crisis. The first time they corrected a mistake in his research before he even noticed it, he grudgingly admitted they made a good team. The first time he instinctively slowed his stride so they could match his pace, He realized, with mild horror, that he was adapting. And then came the Miru bonding trials. The trials Avery had assumed that after the initial ceremony, he'd be off the hook. But no, Miru bonding wasn't just about words, it was about proving compatibility. And so he and Ezri were enrolled in a series of bonding trials. Avery, still in denial about his new reality, had asked, "What happens if we fail the Yao?" "Trials?" Ezri had blinked at him. Failure is not an option. Which, as it turned out, was not a metaphor. The first trial was the test of synchronization, a ridiculous exercise where he and Ajari had to navigate a maze while tethered, together by a shimmering energy link. Every time one of them tried to pull ahead, the tether shocked them. Avery had learned very quickly that he had terrible coordination. The second trial was the ritual of shared burdens, where they had to carry an enormous ceremonial stone through the Miru temple halls without speaking. Avery had immediately tried to argue that he wasn't strong enough for this, but one glare from Sarivan had shut him up. By the time they reached the final trial, the ceremony of mutual defense, Avery had resigned himself to his fate. In this challenge, the two of them had to work together to protect a glowing Miru relic. From a series of automated drones, Ezri, ever the strategist, quickly devised a plan. "You distract them. I will disable their targeting systems," Avery scoffed. "So let me get this straight. I run around like an idiot and you do the smart stuff?" Ezri's glow pulsed in confirmation. "That is correct." Avery sighed. Figures. To his surprise, the plan actually worked. By the end of the trials, he was exhausted, battered, and a little bruised, but victorious. Sarivan observed them with approval. "You have proven yourselves." Avery, panting, raised a weak fist. "Yay." Ajari, ever composed, simply nodded. "It is done." And with that, their bond was officially recognized. As the Miru elders departed, Avery glanced at Ezri. "Well, I guess we're stuck with each other now." Ezri's glow softened. It would seem so. To his surprise, he didn't hate the idea as much as he thought he would. Avery had read countless books on first contact, interspecies diplomacy, and the challenges of cross-cultural relationships. None of them had prepared him for this. His life was no longer his own. It belonged, at least in part, to Ajari. Days had turned into weeks, weeks into months. What had once felt like an absurd accident, a cosmic joke at his expense, was now simply life. He and Ajari were bonded. Nothing would change that. But something had changed. Avery wasn't just tolerating their bond anymore. He was embracing it. The daily life of the bonded by now, the rest of the research station had accepted Avery's new reality. The Miru no longer watched him with curiosity or pity. They now treated him as part of their delegation. The human crew had adjusted as well, though some of them still found the entire situation hilarious. Lieutenant Wong, one of Avery's closest friends, took special joy in teasing him about it. "So," Wong smirked over breakfast one morning, "how's married life?" Avery shot him a glare. "We're not married." "You sure?" Wong nodded toward Ajari, who was meticulously arranging their meal with scientific precision. "Because you two act like an old couple." Ajari, unfazed, took a slow sip of their nutrient broth. "I do not understand your fascination with labels," Wong grinned. "See? Just like a spouse would say." Avery groaned, rubbing his temples. "I swear if I hear one more honeymoon joke." "Honeymoon?" Ajari asked, tilting their head. "Is this another human bonding tradition?" Wong's grin widened. "Oh yeah, it's a mandatory ritual. You and Avery have to take a romantic trip together, preferably somewhere warm with exotic drinks." Ajari considered this. "Intriguing." Avery pointed an accusatory finger at Wong. "I hate you." Wong simply laughed. The science of connection, despite the teasing, Avery had to admit. Having a Miru-bonded partner had its perks. For one, he and Ajari had developed an uncanny ability to anticipate each other's thoughts. Their bond had strengthened through the trials, and now it felt almost instinctive. During a particularly complicated research experiment on the microbial ecosystems of Zyphora 7, Avery didn't even have to explain what he needed. Ajari was already handing him the right instrument before he asked. "You read my mind?" Avery murmured, impressed. Ajari's glow flickered in amusement. "No. I simply understand you." It was unnerving, but also oddly comforting. They made an exceptional team. Avery had always considered himself a lone scientist, preferring to work at his own pace, but now he couldn't imagine working without Ajari. A moment of crisis. The moment their bond was truly tested came unexpectedly. It started with a planetary expedition, a routine field study of Xiphora 7's northern polar region. The research team had prepared for extreme temperatures, volatile weather, and possible seismic activity. But no one had anticipated the storm. It came out of nowhere, a sudden, violent surge of ionized wind that knocked out their communication systems and trapped them beneath a fragile ice shelf. Avery and Ajari were separated from the main group, huddled in a small cave carved by ancient glacial flows. Visibility was non-existent. The cold bit at Avery's exposed skin, and their oxygen supplies were dwindling. Ajari, ever composed, was scanning the walls with a small handheld device. "This structure is unstable. We must move quickly." Avery clenched his jaw, trying to suppress his growing panic. "Yeah? And go where exactly? We can't see a damn thing." Ajari didn't hesitate. "I will guide us." Avery had long since stopped questioning how Ajari seemed to know things no one else did. Whether it was their advanced senses or simply the way their mind worked, he had learned to trust it. So he followed. Step by step, through blinding ice and deafening wind, he followed the faint glow of Ajari's bioluminescence. When he stumbled, they caught him. When his breath came in ragged gasps, they adjusted their pace to match his. When he muttered, "We're not going to make it," they simply replied, "We will," and somehow they did. Hours later, exhausted and half-frozen, they emerged from the storm, just as the rescue team found them. Avery barely registered the medical crew swarming around him, forcing him onto a stretcher, wrapping him in heat blankets. His vision blurred, his body numb, but through it all, one thing remained clear. Ajari never let go of his hand. A realization recovery took time. Back at the station, Avery found himself confined to the med bay, enduring rounds of tests and mandatory rest. He hated it. He hated being still. Ajari, of course, never left his side. At first, he assumed they were just following the rules of ritual proximity. But after a while, he began to suspect something else. "You don't have to stay," he muttered one evening, staring at the ceiling. Ajari, seated gracefully beside his bed, regarded him with an unreadable expression. "I want to stay." Avery turned his head, meeting their gaze. "Why?" Ajari was silent for a long moment. Then their glow softened. "You are important to me." Avery felt something tighten in his chest. Something warm. Something terrifying. For months he had fought against the idea of this bond, resisting the weight of it, the finality of it. But now, staring at Ajari, their steady presence, their unwavering loyalty, he wondered if he had been fighting against something that was never a burden in the first place. Maybe this wasn't a cosmic accident. Maybe it was exactly what he needed. A new beginning. A few weeks later, fully recovered, Avery found himself standing beside Ajari in the quiet of the research station's observation deck. Through the massive window, Xiphora 7 stretched out before them, vast, untamed, beautiful. Ajari spoke first. "I have been thinking," Avery chuckled. "Dangerous." Ajari ignored the joke. "Our bond was not something either of us chose, but it is something we have, now." Avery exhaled. "Yeah. We must decide how to proceed." Avery turned to face them. "What do you want?" Ajari studied him for a long time, their glow pulsing in slow waves. "I want you to choose." Avery swallowed. He hadn't expected that. For so long, he had assumed that he was the one being pulled along by forces beyond his control. that he was the one who had to accept things as they were. But now for the first time Azari was offering him a choice, a real one. He thought about everything they had been through. The trials, the teasing, the arguments, the unshakable presence of Azari at his side, and he realized he didn't want to undo it. He didn't want to go back to being alone. Avery took a deep breath and reached out, pressing his palm against Azari's in the traditional Miru gesture of unity. I choose to stay. Azari's glow warmed, shifting to a deep, radiant gold. And just like that, the bond was complete. Not because of fate, not because of tradition, but because they chose it together.